He didn't expect to find anyone alive that morning, not in the middle of a storm so cold it silenced even the wolves. But just beyond the broken door of his workshop, lying in the snow like a discarded memory, was a girl barely breathing, barely more than a shadow. She didn't speak, not a word. But what she carried deep in those frightened eyes would unravel the past, ignite justice, and stir something long frozen in the heart of a lonely cowboy. This is not just a story about survival. It's about quiet redemption, the cost of truth, and a bond stronger than blood. Subscribe to Wild West Memories for more powerful Wild West stories that remind us sometimes the smallest voice can change everything. He wasn't looking for a life to save. He was just stepping into the storm's aftermath. But beneath the door of his workshop lay a girl buried in the silent white wreckage of a snowstorm, barely breathing, her body a fragile echo in the drift. That moment changed everything. The storm had passed sometime in the night, leaving Red Hollow draped in silence and soft white. Snow clung to eaves like the ski had hit pause. Even the wind seemed spent, curling only in breathless gusts around the chimneys. Samuel Reed stood on his porch, gloved hands around a dented tin mug of coffee gone cold. He didn't drink much these days, but the warmth felt good on his skin. He listened not for anything in particular, but for the kind of stillness only a man hardened by war and loss can know. His boots crunched frost as he crossed the yard toward his workshop, a squat building, leaning eastward in weariness. He repaired stoves for the townsfolk, and though winter made his knees ache, his knuckles remembered how to coax warmth back into iron. The shed's door had blown shut during the storm. Snow drifted in, pooling and dusting his tools like powdered sugar. Samuel stepped inside, muttering about weak hinges. That's when he saw her. At first, she looked like rags. Then he noticed the curve of a shoulder, the length of a bare leg dusted in frost. A girl no older than 16 pressed against a broken cast-iron stove, as if it still held heat. Her dress was torn and soaked. Her fingers were blue. She didn't stir. Samuel fell to his knees. Her skin was ice. He pressed 2 fingers against her neck. A pulse, a faint flicker of life. "Lord have mercy," he whispered. He wrapped her in the old horse blanket he kept for kneeling and carried her inside. She weighed almost nothing, as if something inside her had hollowed out long before the cold found her. In his home he laid her near the fire, coaxed flames until they roared. Her cracked lips didn't part. His careful hands removed her poor excuse for shoes, placing a basin of warm water at her feet. She didn't move. By sun's rise, a hint of color returned to her face. Still fragile, still silent. Samuel watched from his chair by the stove, like a man watching a wounded bird, quiet, patient, afraid to breathe. Late that afternoon, her eyes opened. Dark, wide, glassy with confusion but alert. She tried to sit. He steadied her. She flinched, chest heaving. "It's all right," he said softly. "Ain't gonna touch you unless you ask me to. You're swafy." Her gaze met his, long and cautious, as though she was measuring the man's soul by sight alone. He spoke again. "Name is Samuel Reed. I own the stove shop out back." Still no answer. "You got a name?" Silence. He sighed, took the chipped mug of broth and placed it before her. She drank slowly, as if tasting hope. Another hour passed before she spoke, not aloud, but with her finger tracing letters in the air. Callie. "Callie," he said, heart softening. "All right. That yours?" She nodded once, then sat against the wall, wrapped in the blanket, staring into the fire, as if it might tell her what came next. Only then did he see the scars, thin, pale marks on her wrists and arms. Years old. He recognized them on soldiers, on children who'd lost more than homes. He didn't ask. That night, he set a cot by the fire and gave her the heavier quilt. She refused, the back room shaking at the mere suggestion. So she stayed by the hearth. He didn't press. Days passed in silence. Callie moved carefully, letting nothing come too cozy. She ate what he gave, but never asked. Her eyes darted to every door or window's sound. Samuel began rising earlier, lighting fires sooner, stepping softer. He didn't know why, only that she was there and broken, and a man didn't need the whole story to know sorrow when it's written all over someone's stillness. One morning, he found her staring at a photo on the mantel, Annalise, his lost love. With a crooked smile, kind eyes, the only woman he ever loved. She reached up, touched the frame, then looked away. Samuel said nothing. He just stoked the flame and handed her a piece of warm bread. News of a stranger spread through Red Hollow, quietly like frost creeping over fields. Dottie the baker asked if he was hiding a ghost. He told her simply, she needs rest, and closed the discussion. Red Hollow couldn't hold secrets long. So he watched. And for reasons she didn't know, Callie stayed too. If old stories make your heart slow down for just a beat, then go ahead and hit subscribe. Every subscription is a companion on the trail, a quiet reminder that honest things still deserve to be heard. The wind rose again that night, brushing against the eaves like a hand remembering the shape of a door. Samuel sat in his chair by the stove, a blanket over his legs, a half-read book resting spine up on the side table. The fire inside the cast-iron belly of the old stove pulsed softly, the red glow painting lacy shadows on the wall. Callie had already curled into her cot nearby. She didn't speak, but he could hear the weight of her sleep, the restless, shifting, the uneven breath. It was a different kind of silence than before. Not distrust anymore. Just worn down, as Samuel leaned his head back and let the quiet take him. But it didn't last long. It never did. Memories had a way of coming back, uninvited, but relentless. He was 23 when the war called him. Marched off with boys who barely knew how to saddle a horse, let alone shoot straight. He came back a man with no home, no answers, and too many names burned into his memory, names of those who hadn't made it. But what haunted him most wasn't death. It was Annalise. He could still see her red ribbon in her hair hands that smelled of sage and lemon oil. They'd met at the county fair back before the cannons roared, before anything had gone wrong in the world. She had promised to wait, promised to write every week. And she had, until the letters stopped coming. He'd learned months later from a passing tradesman that cholera had swept through Red Hollow. She hadn't lasted 3 days. No funeral, no stone, just gone. The last letter she ever sent arrived 6 weeks too late, rain-smudged and torn. He kept it still, folded along its creases like time itself had handled it too gently to open. He kept it in a drawer he rarely touched. But tonight, he opened it. The words were faded now, her script hurried as if written between coughs. If this reaches you, Sam, I want you to know I tried. I tried to hold on. They say it's God's will, but I don't think he meant it this way. I have one thing I never told you. I've taken in my brother's child, a girl named Callie. He died in Kansas, and no one else stepped up. I didn't want you burdened with it then. But if you ever come back, she might still need you. Samuel stared at the page for a long while, lips parted, breath shallow. The fire beside him cracked, but he didn't look up. Just sat there holding the letter, like it might change its words if he blinked too long. Callie. He glanced over at the cot. She was still. Could it be? He didn't want to believe in fate. He didn't believe in much anymore. But something about her, the eyes, the guarded way she moved, like she'd learned to expect loss before it came, stirred something old in him. Still, coincidence could be cruel. The next morning was dry but bitter. The sun never quite broke through the clouds, and frost still lined the edges of the windows. Callie moved through the kitchen with practiced care. She didn't look at him directly, but she no longer flinched. That was something. He watched her from the chair, thoughts clouded. He didn't ask. He didn't know how to begin. That afternoon, while she swept near the hearth, he stepped outside to fetch wood. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that settled into your coat and never left. When he came back in, the room was quiet but different. His bedroom door stood slightly ajar. His heart stilled. He moved toward it, careful not to creak the floorboards. Inside, Callie stood at the edge of his dresser, holding a small photograph in both hands. The only one he had of Annalise. Sepia-toned, fading around the edges, but her smile still intact. That half-smile that had once stopped him in his tracks. Callie stared at it, unmoving, lips trembling. He meant to speak something measured, gentle, but before he could say a word, she sank to the floor, still holding the photo like it weighed more than she could carry. Her shoulders began to shake. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet sobs, the kind born from things too long held in. Samuel stood there, frozen, the breath knocked out of him. She didn't look up, didn't see him, but he saw her. And something clicked. Not proof, not certainty, but a deep knowing. The kind that doesn't need explanation. He stepped back, closing the door with a softness that didn't match the storm in his chest. That night, he didn't sleep. It was a Tuesday, quiet, as most in Red Hollow. The kind of day when even the birds chose not to sing, and the wind just moved without sound. Samuel had just finished mending a rusted stovepipe when he heard a knock, 2 quick raps firm, followed by the slow creak of his gate swinging shut. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped onto the porch. There, standing straight-backed in a long wool coat, was Reverend Josiah Fenwick. The man had the kind of face that always looked like it was judging something even when smelling. He held his hat in both hands like a preacher, holding a prayer too sharp to speak aloud. "Morning, Sam," he said. Reverend Samuel nodded. "Cold morning for a walk. Some visits best not postponed," Josiah replied. "May I come in?" Samuel stepped aside without a word. The Reverend walked in, dusted his boots carefully on the mat, and took a seat near the stove. "I hear you've got company," he said, glancing toward the back of the house. Samuel didn't answer. Josiah folded his hands. "The girl. Callie. Word travels fast even through snow. A few folks at the church wondered why she hasn't been brought in." "She's not a stray dog," Samuel said quietly. "No," the Reverend agreed. "She's a troubled child. One the church tried to help. But she ran." Samuel's brows furrowed. Josiah continued, "She came up from Iowa last year, was placed in foster care through the church network, after a very difficult event." "What kind of event?" Samuel asked, his voice a little tighter now. The Reverend paused, measuring his words. "Her father was convicted of murder. Big case, small town. Paper called it the Harrow Ridge slaying. The man was hanged. But the evidence was thin, and there were whispers that the deputy in charge pushed it through too fast." Samuel felt his spine go rigid. "She was sent here afterward, a quiet arrangement. But she disappeared from the foster home 2 months ago. We thought she was lost." At that moment, Callie appeared at the hallway's edge. She had heard everything. Her eyes were wide, pupils tight like a spooked deer. When Josiah turned to her, she bolted, darting into Samuel's room and slamming the door shut behind her. Josiah rose halfway. Samuel held up a hand. "You're done here. I'm only trying to help." Samuel's voice was steady but firm. Help usually knocks softer. The Reverend adjusted his collar. "If she's here tomorrow, I'll have to inform the sheriff. For her sake and yours." He left without shaking hands. Later that evening, as the last light slipped behind the ridge, Callie re-emerged. She didn't sit, just stood near the hearth, arms wrapped around herself, like they might hold her together. Samuel set down his tools. "You want to tell me what that was about?" She shook her head. He handed her a pencil and the small pad they kept near the stove. She hesitated, then scribbled something quickly. He saw, but sighed nothing. Samuel stared at the words. Who? She didn't answer. Just sat down beside the fire body tense. That night, after she fell asleep, Samuel pulled a box down from the loft. Inside were old newspapers. He'd kept them out of habit, like some men keep bullet shells or broken tools. In one issue from the prior spring, an article caught his eye. Convicted in controversial slaying, Harrow Ridge. Father executed. He read it slowly twice. A man named Charles Hart, accused of murdering a neighbor with a shovel during a property dispute. Only witness Deputy Clay Eddings, newly promoted in the county. No murder weapon ever recovered. No blood on Hart's clothes. But the jury convicted him anyway. Samuel sat back, eyes narrowed. Eddings. The same man who now patrolled Red Hollow with too much interest in Samuel's stove shop. The same man who'd stopped by last week to check in and ask how the repairs were coming along. He'd looked around too much, asked too little. Samuel rubbed his jaw, then glanced toward the sleeping girl. Whatever had happened in Harrow Ridge, it hadn't stayed there. And now it was on his porch. Snow kept falling that week, soft and steady, the kind that didn't scream winter, but settled into it. The world outside Samuel's shop was wrapped in quiet like a wool blanket laid over something fragile. Inside, the stove gave off its usual low hum, and Callie began to change. Not all at once, but she started writing. Not just names or warnings, but whole thoughts, scratched down in awkward loops and slanted lines, like someone finding the shape of her voice again. Samuel never asked for them. She just left the pages near the fire each night, folded once, placed beneath a tin cup, or tucked beside the coal box. He read them carefully, always alone, always slowly. The night they came for Papa, I was under the stairs. He told me not to move. I didn't. I heard boots. Not his. Not the sheriff's either. The man who came smelled like smoke, like cheap cigars. His boots were polished. He walked like the floor was his. They took Papa. He was bleeding. Said he hadn't done it. But they didn't care. I told the lady at the house. She said I was making it up. I stopped talking the next day. Samuel folded the page and stared into the fire a long while after. He knew that smell, those boots. Deputy Clay Eddings, always sharp-dressed, always with a rolled cigar in his mouth, never lit, just chewed like a habit too stubborn to quit. The kind of man who made you feel watched even when he smiled. Samuel felt a tremor start in his chest. If Callie was right, and he had no reason to doubt her, then a man was dead by the word of someone who had no business giving it. He needed answers. Real ones. So the next morning, Samuel saddled his horse and rode through the snow-slick lanes of Red Hollow, stopping in front of Dottie's Bakery, just before the town square. The bell over the door jingled when he stepped inside, and the warmth wrapped around him like an old song. Dottie glanced up from the counter, flower on her arms, and a look in her eye that said she'd expected this visit for a while now. "Took you long enough," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Samuel took off his hat. "I need to know something." "About Callie." Dottie nodded once. "Come to the back. I've got biscuits on, and truth always sits better with something warm." They sat in the narrow kitchen behind the storefront, with steam curling up from mugs of tea and the smell of cinnamon on the air. Dottie stirred hers, thoughtful. "She came through me first," she said. "Annalise sent word before she passed. Quiet request. Said a girl would be coming. Wanted me to help her find you." Samuel looked down at his cup. "I thought Callie was her niece." Dottie didn't speak right away, just kept stirring. Then she said gently, "Callie is her daughter." Samuel blinked. "What?" "She was born during the war. Father was a Confederate lieutenant. Annalise met him while volunteering at a hospital near the Tennessee border. It wasn't long, and it wasn't proper, and it wasn't something she could say out loud when she came home. Samuel sat very still. She kept the child a secret, sent her to live with a cousin in Kansas when she was barely 2, wrote letters, sent gifts, visited when she could. But when sickness came for her, she knew she was out of time. That's when she wrote me. Asked me to guide the girl back here. He didn't speak. Dottie reached over, touched his hand. She meant for you to know, Sam. She just ran out of breath before she could tell you herself. That night back at the house, Samuel couldn't sit still. He paced, lit and relit the stove, then finally sat with the envelope Callie had left near the hearth. I don't remember her face well, only the smell of lilac and the way her voice felt warm. I remember someone brushing my hair. I remember someone saying she had to leave, but that I was loved more than I'd ever know. I think that was her. I think I still believe her. He closed the paper slowly. Across the room, Callie sat at the window, knees tucked up, eyes on the snow outside. She didn't turn when he looked, but he said her name. Callie. She glanced over, questioning. He held the letter in one hand, heart pounding like boots on old floorboards. You're not just someone Annalise helped, he said. You're her. She blinked, not understanding. You're her daughter. The words floated out into the room like sparks, and then the silence fell heavy behind them. Callie stared. Then her lips parted slightly, and her eyes filled not with fear, but something more fragile. She didn't cry, just nodded once. Samuel stood. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. Because whatever this was, father, guardian, witness to a life nearly erased, it had begun again. And this time it would not vanish. Snow had turned heavier, piling on rooftops, freezing onto shutters. The world beyond Samuel's shop had become a hush of white, broken only by the occasional groan of timber under ice. Inside, warmth throbbed from the old stove, but threats churned beneath the surface. It was nearing dusk when Deputy Clay Eddings showed up again, this time, with the weight of suspicion in his posture. He pushed through the door with a cautious smile, boots crunching ice, and surveyed the room like it was a crime scene. Evening, Mr. Reed, he said, voice calm. Too calm. Deputy Samuel replied, placing a poker aside. I hear rumors, Eddings continued, that Callie Hart is hiding out here, that she's on the run. Samuel closed his eyes briefly. He didn't flinch. She's not running nor hiding. She's merely staying, he answered evenly. Eddings leaned closer, the smell of unlit cigar, faint but unmistakable. Let both our memories be clear. He rested a hand on Samuel's shoulder, but the grip was unwelcome. You're harboring a missing person. If she stays, I'll have to charge you with kidnapping. If she speaks up, it could ruin things for both of you. Samuel let the words settle between them. The deputy's stare was unnerving, like someone who held power in every silence. Eddings left without another word. But the threat came with his footsteps, a promise of trouble in snow. That night, Samuel slept restlessly, shadows of doubt crawling his chest. He kept one eye on the door, listening for hushed footsteps, familiar or not. Callie lay on her cot near the stove, too far from the wall to escape. He thought about her earlier scribbles about waiting until justice came. Then he thought of Eddings' words, make her keep quiet if she wants to stay alive. He clenched his fists. Around midnight, a smell drifted through the house, sharp and ready. Samuel sat bolt upright. Smoke curled beneath the door. He leapt from his cot, threw open the door to the workshop, now aflame. The corner where rings of coal lay stacked was engulfed. Flames licked at shelves, whispered up beams. Callie hadn't stirred. Samuel dashed inside and grabbed her by the arm. She didn't scream. She didn't move much. He yanked her toward the door, but smoke filled the hallway, fast, thick, and acrid. She began to choke. Her body convulsed like a frightened child, arms flailing half-heartedly. Samuel scooped her up, half carry, half drag, through the blaze out into the cold night. He tumbled down the porch steps into the snow, putting them both beneath a gray ski feuille. She coughed. He shook her shoulders to wake her fully. When her eyes opened again, Samuel realized something. She'd banged her hand on the workshop door before escaping, but not once did he hear her voice call out. She'd saved him, without speaking a word. They made it inside, sat near the hearth, dripping snow and soot. Samuel wrapped her in blankets, gave her water checked for burns. She was steady now, hushed and fragile. He kept silent, letting her breathe evenly. After a long while, he took out the faded letter from Annalise's drawer, the one with her last words. He unfolded it slowly, pieces of gentle script emerging from the crease. If she cannot speak, Sam, then you must speak for her. Even if it means being misunderstood, even if some may hate you for it. Samuel held the paper trembling. The stove's glow flickered across it, giving life to words left behind. He looked at Callie. She sat quietly holding a warm cup in her hands, eyes still haunted. And he made a promise not out loud, but in the quiet between breath and frusty. The following morning, snow had settled like forgiveness across the yard. Samuel stepped outside in his coat boots, sinking slightly. He stood there for a long moment, before heading toward the sheriff's office, letter in hand, Callie's pages in his pocket. He didn't know how it would play out. But one thing he did know, he would speak. He would not let silence be the story told about her, or about himself. Morning came crisp and silver over Red Hollow. Snow lay thick on rooftops and eaves, each house blanketed in stillness. Not a breath of wind stirred yet. The hush carried the weight of expectation. Samuel arrived at the town hall early, cold mists drifting around his boots. Beside him, Dottie walked steady in her coat, her floured hands folded inside woolen gloves. She slipped him a folded paper, one of Callie's notes, her story in her own hand. At the meeting, the usual faces filled the wooden benches: shopkeeper, schoolteacher, postmaster, a few curious farmers. Reverend Josiah sat in front, unmarried and stiff, as if nothing had changed. Dottie rose first. "Folks," she said, voice warm but firm, "I want you to meet someone few of you know, Callie Hart." She nodded to the back. Samuel felt a tremor, but he answered Dottie's steady look with a nod, permission, protectiveness, and something close to pride. Callie entered front footsteps, shoulders straight. She didn't speak. Instead, she laid a single sheet of paper on the committee table. She met every gaze with calm eyes, old as sorrow, young as winter dawn. On that page was written the truth. My father did nothing. The man who accused him was Deputy Clay Eddings. He lied. He wore polished boots. He smelled of cigar smoke. I heard him in the house. I saw them drag Papa out in the night. I saw it all. Samuel gripped the edges of the pew until his knuckles went white. For a moment, nothing stirred in the hall. Then Reverend Josiah cleared his throat. Dottie held her breath. The committee chairman folded his hands. Finally, someone whispered, "Read it again." Callie reached over, slowly unfolding the paper as if peeling a layer of ice. She stood there silent, allowing the words to speak for her. But the real moment came when a stranger rose from the back of the hall. He was a tall man with graying hair and a posture worn by many years on the trail. He wore a weathered Union cavalry hat and a long coat that had seen better winters. Samuel recognized him, not from Red Hollow, but from letters long since tucked away, never mailed. He stepped forward. "Name's Jonathan Price," he said, voice calm, but carrying a life deal. "I served in the same regiment as Charles Hart, Callie's father. I was near Harrow Ridge the night the arrest happened." He paused, meeting the deputy's cold gaze across the room. "I saw Eddings himself leave the Hart place, wiping mud off his boots. No wagon, no evidence of struggle. Just him alone in the dark." A murmur rose across the hall: anger, shame, disbelief. Deputy Eddings turned pale. Before the chairman could stand, Samuel was at his feet. "It's enough evidence," Samuel said quietly, steady. "This man is under arrest." Eddings didn't resist. There was no drawn gun, no final speech, just a slow, haunted look. As two officers stepped forward, he leaned close to Callie's ear and whispered, "You shouldn't have lived to tell this." Then he was taken away, boots echoing on the wooden floor. He didn't glance back. The rest of the morning drifted in slow certitude. The people of Red Hollow, many who once avoided Callie, stood a little taller. The committee accepted her statement. Official papers were drawn. Samuel walked beside her, silent but present. When they exited the hall, snow had turned from silver to brief sunlit white. The air was sharper, cleaner. Dottie reached for Callie's hand, giving her fingers a gentle squeeze. Samuel watched, chest-tight, gratitude and relief swirling in the quiet. That evening, Samuel returned home with Callie. The workshop door stood open, spared by morning light. The stove inside still bore blackened marks from the fire, ghostly patches on its iron belly. Samuel stoked it carefully, listening to the low hum of warmth. Callie sat nearby, shifting so the heat reached her shoulders. He didn't speak. She placed a small wooden token, an old Union penny she'd found among salvage, on the stove's edge. No words. Samuel nodded once. Between stove and snow, they built a semblance of peace. That night, Callie slept soundly. The storms felt like stories past. The kitchen glowed softly, smoke drifting from the chimney, like a sigh of relief. Samuel sat in his chair, hat off, breathing quiet. He opened the journal Callie left beside the stove, a page waiting at the very end. In her careful writing, she'd added one short line, "I think now I can begin speaking again." Winter light came soft over Red Hollow, like an old promise finally kept. The snow on rooftops glowed pale gold at sunrise. The air smelled of wood smoke and something sweeter, something like forgiveness. At the town hall that morning, a hush replaced the usual distrust. Folks arrived with cautious smiles, some nodding at Samuel as if remembering something they'd forgotten. Callie walked beside him, shoulders steady, gaze straight ahead. Inside the modest chamber, the mayor stood clear of the dais, papers in hand. Samuel Reed," he announced, voice solemn. "In recognition of the service he has rendered to this community and to justice, I now recognize Callie Hart, as has no formal family, as his ward, officially under his guardianship." A clerk appeared with the formal certificate. Samuel accepted it in silence. Callie pressed her fingers calmly against the folded paper. No applause followed. Instead, a few silent nods from those in the back, a respectful recognition in the eyes of Red Hollow. When they stepped out, snow still fluttered pale white. This town had looked upon them with suspicion. Now, for the first time, it looked upon them with hope. That afternoon, Samuel returned to the workshop. A new stove stood in place of the old charred iron hearth, fresh cast iron, sturdy and clean, with pipes polished just so. It gleamed in the daylight, like a survivor's first smile. He tapped the side gently. The new stove carried no memory of smoke or fear. It carried warmth, planned, steady, familiar. Callie entered quietly, carrying a kettle. She set it on the stove, lit a small fire, and let water come slowly to boil. Steam nodded in the air, soft and bright, like a note finally sung. Samuel watched. That evening, lanterns burned low and golden. They shared a simple supper, bread, baked by Dottie, broth simmered over the new hearth. No words were needed. But as Samuel rose to sort coal in the corner, he heard it. Sam. One syllable spoken softly and no longer written. He froze. The spoon he held clattered just slightly in the bowl. He turned. Callie stood halfway across the kitchen, eyes up. For the first time, not cast down. Her voice was ragged, tight with surprise, but unmistakable. Sam. He came to her then, heart slow in his chest, and simply took her hand. That night, snow drifted around the windows in silent curtains. Inside, the stove's glow held shadows back. Samuel sat in his chair, Callie beside him, both wrapped in the quiet warmth of home. She leaned forward and placed an envelope on his lap, one of her handwritten pages sealed with care. On the page, 3 words, "Thank you, Sam." Tears gathered in his eyes, but he let them fall. He didn't brush them away. He didn't speak. He just held the words as if they were living things. Days melted into weeks. The snow softened. Red Hollow, once quiet and snowy, began to thaw in its own way. The stove shop hummed again. Repairs, bake pans warmed Earl's little cabin when his wife got sick. Callie started speaking in short sentences, ordering supplies, asking for coal, asking for help. Each syllable came careful, deliberate, like planting a seed in frozen ground. Some days Samuel would tip his hat to neighbors and hear, "Good morning, Sam." "And how's Miss Callie?" Callie would reply, "Fine, thank you," and then smile. Up above the stove, Samuel hung a framed piece of embroidered linen, words, stitched carefully in simple thread. "Where the ashes filed, the warmth remains." Beneath it, Callie pinned a dried white chrysanthemum, once wilted, now pressed between glass. They looked at it often, not as decoration, but as testament. Late one evening, Samuel found Callie at the window. She watched the snow fall slow, a blanket of white that no longer scared her. He moved beside her. She reached up and gently traced his name in the air, "Sam," before turning to him. He nodded and took her hand, guiding her away from the cold. She followed quietly, stepping back into the hearth-lit shadows. In that small kitchen, where ashes once marked pain, now fire, told another story of survival, of truth, of a bond forged not from blood, but from care and conviction. Callie's voice returned, not complete, but enough. Enough to whisper Sam in gratitude. Enough to break the quiet barrier that had held her captive so wise. Samuel sat by her side, presence steady. No longer broken, no longer a lie. Together, they welcomed the longest, warmest winter they'd ever known. If you're still here, still listening, then maybe you're like me. Drawn to stories not just for the gunfire and dust, but for the silence in between. That space where truth hides. If this one stirred something in you, then maybe we ain't strangers after all.